The village sat quietly between red earth and open sky, a place where every path remembered the feet that walked on it. Here, names were not just sounds, they were stories carried from mouth to mouth. A child's mistake, a man's courage, a woman's sacrifice, nothing was forgotten. Even silence spoke. When a greeting was withheld or eyes turned away, everyone understood the judgment hidden inside it. In this village, no one truly lived unseen. Every action was watched, remembered, and weighed like grain on a scale. The land itself seemed alive. Fields of maize and millet stretched wide, shaped by years of bending backs and patient hands. Dust rose with every footstep, clinging to skin like proof of effort. The elders often said the soil could tell who loved it and who mocked it. Those who worked found food and peace. Those who refused felt hunger and shame. It was believed that the land rewarded sweat and exposed idleness, just as fire reveals the strength of clay. At the center of the village stood the elders' council, old men with gray beards and eyes deeper than the wells. They sat beneath a wide tree whose roots twisted like ancient stories. When they spoke, they used proverbs instead of anger. When they listened, they heard not just words, but intentions. People said the elders did not forget anything, because memory was their duty and morality their burden. By midday, the marketplace came alive. Voices rose, baskets changed hands, and laughter mixed with whispers. News traveled faster than money. A man praised in the morning could be mocked by evening. A woman's honor could grow or shrink with a single story. Here, reputation was traded like goods, and everyone knew that honor was worth more than gold. Children grew up hearing the same words again and again. An elder would point to the fields and say, "A man is worth the sweat he leaves on the soil." Mothers repeated it while pounding grain. Fathers spoke it while sharpening tools. It was not advice, it was law. Yet there was one man who walked while others worked. While hoes struck the ground, he leaned against trees. While sweat fed families, he stretched his legs in the shade. Neighbors shook their heads as he passed. "Is he not ashamed?" one woman whispered. An elder sighed softly. "A man who avoids work is already digging a hole for his own name." And the village watched, knowing that a story like his never ends quietly. His name no longer moved freely through the village. It was spoken softly now, like a cracked pot no one wanted to touch. When he passed, conversations bent away from him. Women leaned closer to each other and whispered. Men paused, looked him up and down, then looked away. Sometimes there was quiet laughter, quickly hidden behind hands. Other times there was nothing at all, and that silence cut deeper than words. In this village, a name could rise like a drumbeat or fall like dust, and his had fallen. At home, the weight of that fallen name rested heavily on his mother's back. She rose before the sun, her bones aching, her breath short. She carried water from the stream, her feet slow on the path she had walked all her life. She bent over the fire, pounding grain with arms that trembled but did not stop. When her son sat nearby, staring into space, she said gently, "My child, the day grows old quickly." It was not anger in her voice, only tired hope. At night, she counted a few coins by the firelight, coins earned from small harvests and long days. Some nights, she pushed her bowl aside and said she was not hungry, just so he could eat. Each sacrifice made his empty hands feel heavier. His siblings carried the house on their shoulders. One returned from the fields with mud on his legs and pain in his knees. Another came back from the market with rope burns on her palms and dust in her hair. They dropped their tools and ate in silence, watching him chew food he had not earned. "How long will we carry you?" his brother finally asked, his voice tight. "You sleep while we break our backs," his sister added. "What excuse will you bring tomorrow?" He shrugged, as if words were enough to feed a family. Outside the compound, the village had its own rules, older than any living person. A man was expected to build or protect, to stand firm when life pushed hard. Those who did not were pointed at, not out of cruelty, but as warning. Children were told, "Work hard, or you will grow into that man." Each time he heard this, his chest burned with shame. The elders noticed too. One afternoon, they called him beneath the wide tree where judgments were spoken calmly and remembered forever. An elder looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "A river that refuses to flow," he said slowly, "will soon smell." Another elder added, Hands that stay empty too long forget their purpose. Their voices were not loud, but their meaning was heavy. When he walked away, he felt doors closing behind him. Soon, help came less often. Food was no longer shared freely. Greetings lost their warmth. The safety net he had leaned on began to tear, thread by thread. That was when something shifted inside him. Shame hardened into bitterness. He watched others move forward while he stood still. One evening, alone with his thoughts, a dangerous idea crept into his mind, smooth and tempting. If hard work brought honor, maybe suffering could be acted. If pain earned sympathy, maybe sympathy could bring reward. As the thought settled, the wind stirred the trees, and somewhere beyond the village, fate paused, as if it had heard its name called. He wandered through the marketplace as the morning sun poured gold over clay huts and dusty paths. The air was thick with the smell of roasted grains, fresh fish, and firewood smoke. Voices rose and fell, carrying stories faster than baskets changed hands. One tale caught his ear. A man from a distant village had vanished, only to return with sacks of coins. Another spoke of a wealthy merchant's son who had been taken and released, and in the space of one moon, had amassed riches no honest work could earn. The whispers spread like smoke, curling into his ears, planting a strange seed. His stomach tightened with longing, his hands itched for the coins he had never earned, and a new voice grew louder than the old teachings of patience and labor. "What fools!" he muttered, brushing his fingers over the smooth wood of a market stall. "If suffering can bring such gold, why should anyone sweat in the sun?" And in the corners of his mind, the elders' proverbs murmured, warning him of pride and deception, of rivers that refused to flow and men whose laziness led to ruin. But he pushed them down, silencing them, convinced that a careful lie could harm no one and reward him beyond measure. Greed had begun to listen louder than wisdom, and the rhythm of his heartbeat matched the rush of temptation. At night, he drew a plan in the shadows of his small hut. No one knew, not his mother bent over the fire, not his siblings dreaming of another day in the fields. Every step was measured, where he would go, what he would leave behind, how panic would be sown like seeds into the hearts of those who cared for him. Fear and false confidence twined around his mind, whispering that he could outwit the village itself. He chose the forest at the edge of the village, a place of old fears and unfinished spirits. Its twisted trees reached like the fingers of ancestors who had long since passed, and the wind through the leaves carried warnings no man should ignore. This forest was alive in ways the village children were told to respect, rumors of restless souls, of travelers who vanished and never returned. To him, it was opportunity, but also a mirror of his own moral darkness. Along the path, he scattered signs of struggle, broken calabashes, a torn cloth, footprints leading in circles. Each clue was deliberate, meant to stir panic, meant to seal him deeper into the lie he was creating. Every step he took into the shadows carried him further from honor and closer to betrayal, until the forest seemed to lean in, watching, waiting, and whispering that some secrets were never meant to be hidden. The village awoke to an unusual silence. No footfalls on the dusty paths, no creak of doors opening, no laughter spilling from the marketplace. The absence of one man, so ordinary in his misdeeds, stirred unease that spread faster than morning smoke. People paused in the street, baskets in hand, eyes scanning each other, whispering questions that grew into fear. Where has he gone? Was it the river spirits? Curiosity twisted into dread, and the village felt its rhythm falter, as if the land itself had noticed something missing. From the small hut at the edge of the village, a cry split the morning air. His mother, bent by years of labor and worry, fell to her knees, hands clawing at the earth. "Oh, my son! My strength, my shame, my fate!" Her voice rang through the compound, carrying grief so raw that neighbors froze mid-step. Women wept beside her, children clutched one another, and men lowered their heads, sensing the weight of a sorrow too large for words. Her despair became the heartbeat of the village, pulsing through everyone who heard it. The elders gathered beneath the council tree, their faces grave beneath the long shadows of dawn. They spoke little, for even their voices could not capture the dread creeping through the village. Some feared the dishonor that might follow if outsiders learned of this disappearance. Others worried about spiritual consequences, angered ancestors, restless spirits, and the subtle curses that came from neglecting tradition. Each furrowed brow, each silent glance, spoke volumes. The village's name was at stake. Then came the drums, low and insistent, calling everyone to the square. The rhythmic pounding echoed off the clay walls and into the hills. Families assembled, chanting protective words, while incense burned in clay bowls. Elders murmured prayers, calling for truth to come forth, for the unseen dangers to be held at bay. The community moved together, united by fear and hope, by the knowledge that something must be done. Before long, the first messages arrived, slipped beneath doors and tied to tree roots. The words were sharp, cruelly precise, demanding ransom with threats woven in like poisoned arrows. Fear multiplied as each note seemed to speak in a new voice, as if the very lie had grown teeth. The village shuddered under its weight. The family, trembling and desperate, began to sell their livestock, the animals they had raised with care and sweat. Coins changed hands, debts were borrowed from distant relatives, and pride was swallowed with every sale. The fire of tradition, honoring family, guarding honor, working the land, burned faintly, overshadowed by loss and grief. Each cow sold, each goat traded, became a reminder that deception carried its own price, and that even a man's absence could rip the village apart. The village had already paid the price for his deception. His mother's hands were raw, her nights sleepless, as she wept over empty bowls and sold animals she had tended for years. "If only he had lifted a hoe," she whispered to the wind, her tears wetting the clay floor. His siblings carried heavier loads, their backs bent under what should have been shared. Every coin borrowed, every sacrifice made, spoke of love twisted into torment. And the deeper the village sank into loss, the heavier grew the betrayal he had sown. Each step he had avoided now weighed upon others, binding hearts and hands in suffering. In the forest, the consequences of his lie became flesh and bone. Hunger gnawed at his belly, the wind cut through his thin clothes, the nights were long, merciless. His stomach tightened with every empty moment, his limbs trembled from weakness. For the first time, he felt the cruel balance of the world. The land he had scorned and the people he had betrayed now mirrored his own suffering. The lie that promised comfort had transformed into a cage, each shadow whispering reminders of truth he could not escape. The forest spoke in voices older than men. Twigs cracked like brittle bones under unseen feet. An owl called, its cry sharp and accusing. The wind rattled dry branches, carrying murmurs that seemed to echo the words of elders long past. He pressed his back against a tree, eyes wide, heart pounding. "It is only the forest," he muttered to himself, though the voice in his mind trembled. "Just trees and wind." Yet he knew deep inside that the spirits of his ancestors were awake, watching, judging, and waiting. Dreams came unbidden, thick and heavy. In the flicker of sleep, ancestors appeared, their eyes dark with disappointment. Faces of the living intertwined with the dead, friends he had neglected, mothers he had disappointed, men and women whose respect he had squandered. Their voices spoke in riddles and warnings. Deception feeds the present, starves the soul tomorrow. What you flee from in life will meet you in the night. Each vision blurred reality, guilt pressing so tightly it was hard to breathe. At first, he laughed, a brittle, hollow sound, trying to fool himself. "It is only the wind, only the trees," he whispered, clenching his teeth against the cold. But laughter did not last. The shadows deepened, the cries grew nearer, and the forest seemed to lean in, tightening its grip around him. Fear rose like a tide, relentless, undeniable, teaching him in ways he had refused to learn before. Fate, long patient, had begun to pull him into its hands, and no trick, no lie, could loosen the grip. The hunters arrived before sunrise, moving silently through the edges of the forest. These were men who read the land like a sacred book, tracing footprints in the soil as though each print spoke secrets aloud. Their eyes scanned every branch, every fallen leaf, measuring time and weight, whispering to one another in low tones only they could understand. Their presence sent a ripple through the village. This was no longer a simple disappearance. The lie had grown teeth, and now it walked in spaces where danger slept. Under the wide sky, the elders gathered beneath the council tree. Each face was carved with age and worry, eyes shadowed by concern. One spoke slowly, letting each word fall like a stone into quiet water. "The river does not hide its bends," he said. Another added, "A man who walks in deceit also walks among shadows." Silence followed, thick and heavy, before another elder continued, "We cannot face this alone. The fate of one is the fate of all." The matter had shifted from personal shame to communal responsibility. Traditional priests and spiritual guides were called to the square, carrying staffs carved with symbols of ancestors long gone. Smoke curled from clay bowls, carrying prayers into the early morning. The village gathered, hushed and attentive, as the spiritual leaders spoke with the unseen, seeking guidance and justice. The air shimmered with expectation, as though the forest itself was leaning closer to listen. No human trickery could hide from these forces. Truth would be drawn into the open. Rituals began. Drums throbbed, their sound vibrating through the earth, echoing in every hut. The elders sprinkled water and herbs along the paths, chanting words that treated truth as if it were alive, demanding it to step into the sun. Torches flickered against the dark forest edge, casting moving shadows that seemed to stir with a life of their own. Each gesture, each sound, was meant to strip away concealment, to protect the innocent, and to summon what had been hidden too long. Far within the forest, the man who had thought himself clever crouched beneath a canopy of leaves. Unseen, he had stepped into a web spun by forces older than himself. Branches cracked like ancestral fingers pointing in accusation. A chill ran down his spine as if the land itself recoiled from his presence. Fate had begun to tighten its invisible grip, and he could feel it coil around his heart, slow and unrelenting. His body began to betray him. Hunger gnawed, and exhaustion made his legs tremble. Confusion clouded his mind. Every sound seemed to echo judgment. A branch fell nearby, and he jumped, heart racing. Sweat mingled with the dust on his face, his hands shaking as he tried to steady himself. Guilt dug deep, rooting in his spirit, and fear spread through him like a cold river. The lie he had crafted so carefully was now a chain, and the weight of it was breaking both body and soul. The sky darkened without warning, clouds rolling like the backs of angry elephants. Wind tore through the forest, snapping branches and bending young trees as though the world itself were rebuking him. Rain fell in sharp sheets, drumming against leaves and soil, and he shivered under the makeshift cover of a hollowed tree trunk. Every drop felt like accusation, each gust a whispered warning. He had thought the forest a safe hiding place, but now it seemed to rise against him, punishing the deceit he had dared to weave. Eyes glinted in the shadows. Birds took flight in chaotic flocks, and nocturnal creatures prowled with unusual boldness. Every crackle of a twig made his heart leap. The darkness was thick, pressing close, curling around his chest, and he imagined footsteps that had no owner. "It is only the wind, only the night," he muttered, but his voice trembled, swallowed quickly by the roar of the storm. Paranoia gnawed at him, regret pooled like stagnant water in his stomach. The earth beneath him was no longer the soft, yielding friend of his youth. Mudslides clung to his feet, roots seemed to rise and twist under his weight, and stones shifted as though mocking his presence. He stumbled and fell, hands scraping against jagged roots. "The land, it knows," he whispered through chattering teeth. The fertile soil that had once rewarded toil and honesty now rejected him. Every step, every breath, was a reminder that deceit leaves a mark not just on hearts, but on the world itself. Then came voices not of the village, rough and cruel, cutting through the wind. Strangers moved through the forest, their eyes hard, their intent sharp. They did not belong here, they had no knowledge of family, no care for custom. He froze, listening as they drew closer, their laughter low and dangerous. The lie he had planned, the game he thought he controlled, had attracted forces far more threatening than he had imagined. Panic clenched his chest. Every careful plan unraveling, he realized he was no longer the master of events. The deception had taken a life of its own, a predator stalking him even as he tried to hide. Confidence, once his cloak, had fallen away entirely. Only fear remained, raw and consuming, as he whispered into the storm, "I only wanted wealth. I only wanted comfort." The forest seemed to echo his confession, as though acknowledging that arrogance had died, and survival alone could guide him now. The forest was still, though the storm had passed. Yet he could not find peace. The memory of his mother's bent back and tired hands returned with every shadow that moved. Her tears, shed for his laziness and deceit, echoed louder than the wind rattling the trees. He crouched on damp soil, shivering, whispering to himself, "Mama, I have brought only shame upon your head." The ache in his chest was heavier than any hunger, heavier than the cold night pressing against his skin. He wrestled with his next step. Should he run deeper into the forest, disappear beyond the eyes of men? Or should he return and confess, risking scorn and punishment? Fear pressed like a stone against his ribs, but guilt tugged harder, whispering of the lives he had touched with his falsehood. "I can leave, or I can face what I have done," he muttered, voice trembling. Every branch, every rustle of leaves seemed to push him toward truth, toward surrender, toward a reckoning he had long evaded. The hunger that gnawed at him brought clarity. No wealth, no secret trick, could nourish the spirit the way honesty could. He thought of the animals he had sold, the money borrowed, the pride swallowed by those he loved. In the silent night, the lesson became clear. Riches earned by deceit left the soul empty. His chest ached with understanding. "A lie may fill the belly," he whispered into the shadows, "but it starves the heart." Fate waited, patient and unyielding, for him to take the next step. At last, the forest gave up its secret. A hunter, silent as the night, found him shivering beneath the twisted roots of an ancient tree. No longer could he hide. The earth that had once shielded him now revealed his presence. Hands trembling, he allowed himself to be taken, each step a confession in motion. The trees themselves seemed to sigh, as though bearing witness to the collapse of deceit. He returned to the village, footsteps muffled on the familiar paths, yet every eye seemed to know. Elders, neighbors, and his family awaited him in the square, faces lined with sorrow, anger, and quiet expectation. The entire village became a living court, watching the man who had once scorned their values return not with wealth, but with the heavy weight of truth. Every heartbeat, every glance, confirmed the lesson he had carried through the forest. No lie can escape the eyes of those who remember. The village square, usually alive with chatter and laughter, fell silent the moment he stepped forward. Eyes that once softened with pity now burned with knowing. Mothers clutched their children, and neighbors leaned forward, not in curiosity, but in quiet understanding. Every glance carried the weight of betrayal. Every whisper that had once flitted behind closed doors now rested openly on him. His name, once spoken lightly, now trembled in the air, heavy with disappointment. The man felt the trust he had squandered collapse, layer by layer, like brittle clay. His mother moved forward, her feet slow and heavy. Her face, lined with years of labor and sacrifice, spoke louder than any shout. Tears traced paths down her cheeks, reflecting the morning sun like rivers of grief. She said nothing, yet the village understood every syllable her silence carried. "My son, why did you betray the hands that raised you?" Her voice broke quietly, a plea that trembled in the ears of all who watched. Every eye followed her pain, feeling it settle in their chests. The square held its breath. No one yelled, no one struck him. Silence fell heavier than any cry could. The air was thick, as if the ancestors themselves had gathered unseen, weighing the man's deeds. The shame he felt was tangible, pressing against his shoulders, crawling into his spine, leaving him naked before both living and spirit. Pride, once a warm cloak around him, had dissolved entirely. The elders finally stepped forward, their footsteps slow and measured. One spoke in a voice that carried the weight of years. "He who walks without labor will stumble when the village sleeps. Yet the hand that judges must first remember mercy." They spoke in proverbs, not in rage, weaving lessons of patience, justice, and restoration. Each word shaped the air like clay, guiding the assembly toward balance rather than vengeance. Another elder raised a palm, the gesture of careful thought. "We must restore what has been broken. Punishment is needed, but let it build, not destroy. The boy must learn, not only fear." Their voices carried the lesson clearly. African justice favors restoration over ruin. Compassion must walk beside discipline, as the village itself must heal alongside the man who brought it shame. Every face in the square nodded, understanding that this was not merely judgment, it was a path to redemption. The village square hummed with quiet anticipation as the elders gathered beneath the wide sky. The verdict came slowly, measured, and firm, choosing the path of teaching rather than breaking. "Justice that heals is stronger than anger that destroys," the oldest elder said, his voice carrying across the square, heavy with wisdom. The man lowered his eyes, knowing the weight of truth now pressed upon him like the midday sun. The community watched as dignity was preserved, and the lesson became visible in the steady gaze of every elder. He was not beaten, nor banished. Instead, he was given work, tasks meant to restore the honor he had squandered. "Your hands will speak for you before your mouth can ask forgiveness," one elder intoned, sending him to the fields, to the waterholes, to help mend fences and repair the roads. Each movement of his hands was a repayment for the grief he had caused, sweat his currency, and humility his lesson. The labor was long and unending, yet every drop of perspiration stitched a new understanding into his chest. The days rolled on, relentless under the sun. Sweat dripped from his brow, dust coated his skin, and muscles ached with unfamiliar effort. At first, he resented every task, but slowly, the rhythm of work began to reshape him. Pride faded, replaced by endurance, and with each swing of the hoe or lift of a bundle, humility settled quietly in his chest. He understood, at last, what shame alone could not teach, that responsibility and effort were the true measures of a man. His mother watched him from the doorway of their small home, her heart unlearning the constant fear she had carried. Slowly, trust returned, and her bent back seemed to straighten in relief. The village itself seemed to breathe again as families went about their work, gossip replaced by nods of acknowledgement, and the unity that had been fractured began to mend. Balance returned, not by punishment alone, but through the shared understanding that justice was meant to restore, not destroy. And in the hush that followed, the villagers repeated the proverb that would linger in every mouth and heart for generations: "A man who runs from work will one day work for his own shame." It was more than a saying, it was a truth that stretched beyond this man, beyond this village, binding fate, morality, and justice together under the eternal African sun.